I'm a chartered town planner by profession, and one of the things I'm going to talk about when the presentation is actually up and running is really, the distinction between some of these terms that people throw about, just to make sure people understand where planning ends, where architecture starts, where other disciplines come into all of this. My colleague Kate Eisman is an environmental and sustainability expert, and Andrew is an architect. And I think it'll be useful because we've got slightly different perspectives on this. I'm going to give a sort of an overall overview of the system, as it were, and some of the issues, the sort of big issues that I think possibly might replicate a little bit what Councillor Vickers had said this morning, by all accounts. Andrew's going to be talking about some scheme-specific delivery. This is probably more in relation to sites that have already got consent and perhaps the very specifics of how to, some of the issues that have cropped up, how to actually design, specific schemes around communities, etc. And then the even bigger issue in terms of some of the things we're talking about in terms of, very large schemes, big village extensions, even new settlements. We're going to look at one case study of how we've actually, an actual methodology we've imposed to look at appraise, these sort of options, which again I think is pretty useful in terms of some of the things I've talked about. So it'll probably be myself, then I'll introduce Andrew, and then I'll introduce Kate. We're probably going to run a quick sort of workshop after that, and then we'll, end the thing possibly with a question and answers come panel. So I'll go on first. I'm just to introduce you, I run my own town planning consultancy. My previous life, I went into the private sector at about 2006, 2007. Before then, I was a principal at Bolsover District Council. Before that, I was a senior planner at the City of Lincoln, and before that, for many years, I was, I cut my teeth at Scunthorpe Borough and stayed when it reorganised into North Lincolnshire. So, my professional history is around this part of the world. I mean, this is useful to start. So this is again very planning focused, but again this term keeps people thinking. You keep hearing the term town planning. What does it mean? I mean, this is the government's own definition, the guidance, and this gives us a lot of clues about some of the sort of the topics we're talking about. It shapes the places where people live and work and the country we live in. So it's about place shaping and the sort of things Andrew is going to talk about. It plays a key role in supporting the government's wider social, environmental and economic objectives. Now that's three possibly complementary but possibly conflicting objectives here. And lastly, it's about delivering sustainable communities, and that's very much Kate's speciality. So as I say, it's about shaping places, so it's embodying spatial approaches, the sort of approaches that Andrew's going to talk about. It's both facilitative and regulatory. A lot of people will assume that the planning department at the local authority or the county or whatever is literally, a regulatory function. It's making decisions based on policy. Some councils have got what you call development control sections. Others have got sections that are called development management, and I think the latter is more appropriate to what the duty actually is. It isn't just, imposing standards. It ought to be, a creative element as well. It is actually, having the skills to actually sort of, intervene and facilitate schemes as well. This next one I think is where people usually butt heads with the planning system, because it's participatory, and this is the $1 million issue. It's about reconciling competing public and private wants and needs. It is one of the few structures built into the sort of, the local government system in the UK that aims, that should bring in the skills to actually, reconcile all these conflicts. And I think that's possibly why planning is such a controversial discipline, because you can't, it's one of those things where you can't please any of the people any of the time. It upsets people. It's inherently controversial, is what I'm saying, and it's possibly, it's about compromises, and it's possibly, about reaching the best decision in the circumstances. Lastly, it is a holistic discipline in that it's balancing, again, it's possibly conflicting, but also in a sense complementary social, economic and environmental objectives. And anybody who knows about this, that's very much, almost a definition of what sustainability is as well. So sustainability and some of the stuff Kate's talking about is actually how to offset these things, how to actually look at all the sort of pros and cons in these different compartments and actually reach an ultimate decision, how you actually, almost scientifically go about doing that, because otherwise it is very subjective, it's very emotive. So what do planners actually do? Right, most people say, oh, you sit around a drawing board, don't you, all day? I haven't sat around a drawing board for 30 years. I don't draw things. I see myself more probably as a quasi-legal profession. Most of what I do is actually sort of advisory and, I suppose, sort of advocacy. As I said, it's an eclectic discipline. It includes sort of, legal input and advocacy. It does include design, but in a far broader, probably not a site-specific level as Andrew will deal with. In the sort of the stuff I do is commercial. It'll be about sort of, probably being a lead project manager. It's about negotiation, liaison, including sort of specialisms like sort of community consultation, that type of thing. A big one, conflict management. Again, probably comes down to the sort of community involvement elements of it. And within planning, there is specialisms. I mean, I'm a generalist. There are some, you'll get planners who only deal with transport or retail or, flood protection or something like that. But I think the last point is quite important. Of all the sort of local government functions, I think planning is the frontline discipline in terms of environmental protection, because planning, because it encompasses all these, as I say, competing needs that need, reconciling. If it's done properly, planning is the, almost the sort of clearinghouse for assessment of all these, specifics, be it archaeology, flood risk, hydrology, all these elements is what I'm trying to say there. I mean, just an interesting one. What is the distinction between, it was all the planner's fault, it was all the architect's fault. Again, just the difference. I mean, on a big project, I will be the coordinator of the actual planning application and probably the sort of lead negotiator and, the project manager at that level. Quite often I will be the lead on public engagements, on the consultation elements of it. Some elements of the planning application, this is a bit specific, you probably don't need to know what a design and access statement is, but that was just an example of how a planner and an architect work together that, a design access statement is actually a statutory requirement of a planning application. Quite often that will be a sort of point of interface between myself and somebody like Andrew. I will put the sort of, tease out Andrew's or the architect I'm working with design philosophy on the site and put it into planner speak, really. And this goes back to just the point that sometimes I would be involved with sort of, beyond site level, the sort of master plan or the sort of broader framework level of input on a big project. The type of project that Kate will be introducing later. And I think, again, before we get into the sort of the very specifics, and certainly from what I think came out from the sort of introductions earlier, just to make sure everybody's clear about exactly how the system works at present. It does, I promise you. Right. The role of national government. The government issued policy legislation that I won't say triples down, but it is at the top of the system, and everything lower down needs to have regard to. So that's the planning action or the subsidiary legislation under that. The National Planning Policy Framework, this is the core guidance from the government in terms of what local authorities and what applicants need to take into account. This is usually the most important thing that you really need to show compliance with. This is very difficult to put forward schemes that are not National Planning Policy Framework compliant. It replaced what used to be called planning policy statements, or I think they were planning policy guidance before that, and these were about 24 very specific, there was a planning policy statement on employment, there was a planning policy statement on archaeology. This was quite a creditable idea of actually trying to streamline this into a single core document. It's got what's called planning practice guidance under it, so they didn't get away entirely with this very sort of streamlined approach. But all these topics I've talked about, the National Planning Policy Framework will say something about any sort of land use or development based issue that you're interested in. It will have a statement of what the government sees as their priorities and preferred approaches, as it were. Below that, I mean, this is just useful to go on to exactly what the sort of the implications of this National Planning Policy Framework. So as I've said, it covers all sort of development-based topics. Most important is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Now this is one slight issue with the National Planning Policy Framework. In an attempt to streamline it, I think there's a lot of criticism that it was so vague that an awful lot of this has actually had to be teased out by the courts. In a sense, sustainable development could be said to be a sort of the sort of appraisal and offsetting approach that Kate will talk about. The courts have actually considered this quite recently, and actually the legal definition is far narrower than that. Basically what the courts have now ruled, and this was only about a month ago, this is a definitive case where the judges at the High Court basically said that a development is not sustainable if it offends against any part of the National Planning Policy Framework. So perhaps that's more rigid than what I'm talking about. Perhaps it's not a case of offsetting. You can say, well, a scheme's got perhaps major problems in this area, but look at the benefits in this, this other area that offsets the other.
The supermarket sports centre scenario.
So the courts are really effectively saying you grossly offend against any aspects of the National Planning Policy Framework, it aids sustainable development. This has always been the case, but it's just worth mentioning. Proposed development that occurs with an up-to-date local plan, I'll come on to local plans later, should be approved. And proposed development conflict should be refused unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. So this places the entire onus down onto the districts and counties who produce development plans. It says local plan, but they actually use the term development plan. So presumption in terms of decision making in accordance with adopted local plans. Location and quantity of new housing stock is devolved to local authorities. Now this is important. They must identify sites capable of delivering a 5-year supply of housing to meet their housing targets. Now a lot of people, this issue quite often comes up, for instance, empty homes as a perennial. Why do we build, why do we need to build new houses when, there's all these empty homes around? Well, the methodology that underpins these is actually quite prescriptive. As part of the development plan preparation, the evidence base, councils have to produce what's called a strategic housing land availability assessment. And you might hear this term schlag chucked around for that. And what that basically does is it appraises every potential source of housing. So empty homes is actually built into the calculation of what the available supply is. So at the end of it, the housing land availability assessment is the source of sites for X number of houses. You just need to be aware that the empty homes element is already built into that. And given sort of shortfalls in housing, supply against need, you still quite often find out, there's still quite a significant sort of residual supply to find. If that 5-year supply, if there isn't enough sites to meet that, that presumption in favour of sustainability definitely kicks in, and it's an enhanced presumption. Still, you can't grossly offend against other parts of the National Planning Framework, but it's harder for local authorities to refuse sites, specifically housing sites, if they demonstrably haven't got this 5-year housing supply. Now, if a council, this is a running thing as well. So, a lot of councils have done things like sort of try to prorata their shortfall over, say, 20 years of a development plan period. You can't do that. You've got to have a very good local justification for why you can do that.
I couldn't get my mind around when Ian this morning was talking about 40,000 projected growth of population, and we were planning to build 40,000 homes. Well, an average of 2.2, as he quoted, that's twice as many homes, pro rata than the population versus the growth indicated.
That central linkage to local plan has got a... Well, we'll talk about that specifically.
Is that 20%
I mean, the
going up to 50%?
The 20% buffer is in case you're under supply, basically. If you, I mean, consistent under the supply, if you haven't met your housing requirements, if you haven't delivered your housing requirements, say for 3 or 4 years, a planning inspection. The government can't do this. I mean, this is interesting. The government, there's no statutory monitoring anymore of housing numbers, and the way that councils are actually calculating their 5-year supply, there's a lot of book cooking going on, and there's a lot of disparity around this, and you usually only find this out at planning appeal, which I'll go on to. But if a planning inspector basically says, you know, council actually are telling me massive porkies, you've got a hell of a housing supply short, you've got a hell of a delivery problem. All this lot has been put on the first 5 years. The other thing that's interesting is that the government have just issued a housing white paper this year, fixing our broken housing market. And they're particularly, I think, coming down hard on councils trying to sort of, play fast and loose with this 5-year housing supply calculation. What they're basically going to say is under delivery, if the under delivery is so great that you need more than a 20% buffer, your buffer's as big as your under delivery. And that's, I mean, some councils, could be looking at 65% buffers on, in the first 5 years. Massive acceleration of having to find housing sites they've just failed to deliver. So this is all about delivery. And if councils are failing, the simple answer is that that this 5-year supply figure stacks up. That under deliveries, mounts up, potentially very early. And this is when perhaps, things that were previously unthinkable, like for instance new towns and things like that, are going to come back on the agenda.
Is this a 5-year ongoing and another 5-year, or is it a one-off?
It depends how they calculate it. Really, again, if you're grossly under delivering, 50, you've got a 5-year figure, and the last 5 years' worth you've delivered, say about 30% of that. You're going to have a buffer.
But if you're on target.
Yeah. Really, that white paper's alluding to year-on-year monitoring, whether that's actually going to be more stringent, because, before Cameron's government, councils actually, it was a statutory requirement that councils actually issued every year what was called an annual monitoring report. They're still advised to, but it's not mandatory, and they don't have to actually submit it to the Secretary of State for approval. So nobody is actually definitively monitoring 5-year housing supply, and I think they really ought to.
Yeah.
I think that is a big problem at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about what the very broadly what the national, what the government's objectives are as iterated in the National Planning Policy Framework. The development plan. So we've said that the National Planning Policy Framework is saying that decision making should be in accordance with an adopted development plan. Let's start that for a minute. That's an important word. Adopted. The central linkage to local plan has recently been adopted. Some councils are still working to development plans from the 90s, and development plan lag has been a real issue in the UK, and successive governments have tried to prod local authorities to get on with development plan preparation. Basically, where your development plan's out of date, and this is why the National Planning Policy Framework is so important, the National Planning Policy Framework says very clearly if your development plan's out of date, particularly for housing delivery purposes, it's decision making in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework. So, councils don't try and waive a 1996 local plan at a public inquiry or something and say that trumps the National Planning Policy Framework, because it doesn't, and the courts have, worried this many times. Again, this is possibly teaching people to suck eggs, I'm sure you're aware of this, but just to make sure that people are aware of the different levels of responsibility. County council, Lincolnshire, as you're aware, is a 2-tier system. There is a county who will, for development plan purposes, produce probably the minimum waste local plan. That's the case for Lincolnshire anyway. The district councils below that, they produce local plans. Sometimes the old system used to call local development frameworks. The local development framework was a system to really, again, try and speed up delivery. Back in John Prescott's days, what it basically meant was you adopted, what they wanted was a portfolio approach to development plan making. So they produced a core strategy first, which looked at the very big issues like the 5-year housing supply, main locations of growth, so the distribution of the sort of housing cake between settlement hierarchy, things like that. And then you were supposed to not worry about the detailed policies on, garden sheds and satellite dishes until sort of, later, what we would call DPDs. Councils can still come, usually sort of portfolio approach, getting the core strategy adopted quickly, then, decide to sort of, do subsidiary development plan documents later, or they can do it in one big go, like Central Lincolnshire Local Plan, which is a single plan that covers everything. So just to be aware, you will see some councils have things called core strategies adopted, some will have things called development plan documents, some will have local plans, but for national planning policy framework purposes, they are all the development plan. If it's adopted, it's the development plan.
Those are cascading necessarily downwards then, so that the parish councils and town councils cannot produce a neighbourhood plan which would conflict with the overall integrated overview that the county council's doing.
Yeah, let's just go on to, I'll go into detail on this one, on the neighbourhood, where neighbourhood plans come from and come into the system. Unitary councils, just be aware that some councils where there isn't a two-tier system, like where I work, North Lincolnshire is a unitary, there's no they abolished Humberside County Council, so it's a single tier. So just be aware that unlike Lincolnshire, North Lincolnshire for instance, that council is responsible for highways, minerals, waste, everything in that council. North East Links is the same, it's a single tier. As I would imagine most of the North Bank authorities are. I think East Lindsey, Hull certainly is. If there's no county, it's a single tier, they're called unitaries. Parish and town councils, the National Planning Policy Framework and the Localism Act quite pragmatically introduced the ability for communities to contribute to the development plan by producing and adopting neighbourhood plans, and these are part of the development plan as well. These are like the final, as you said, the final tier of the cascade down, from the district-wide adopted development plan. I mean, this is something, when I'm, screening an application, it's I need to be aware of. Is there a neighbourhood plan in place? Is there a, what's the plan above that? Is the plan above that out of date or current? Quite complicated, really. It was very right. This is, I think answering the question that you asked earlier. It was very much the philosophy when they came up with neighbourhood plans. I mean, obviously, the minute this was touted, the development industry said, this is a NIMBYist charter, really. These are definitely supposed to be a more than approach. What the government is saying is all these little sort of plucky town and parish councils are being, sort of disadvantaged over the year. They're all itching for more development. They need growth and things like that. So really, this was an ability for the lower tier councils to actually deliver more than the development plan. It is definitely not a vehicle to trump the development plan above. If you worry a big allocation to the development plan, you can't then issue a neighbourhood plan which deallocates it. So it's always envisaged as a more than approach. Some neighbourhood plans are taking that approach. Others, unfortunately, I think, a lot of them, the ones I've seen, have got very much into detailed procedure, so in actual fact they're quite often seen as, we're unhappy with the way the district council deals with planning applications, we're going to, so it's requirement for more detailed, levels of plans submitted with applications. Quite a lot of the policies I'm seeing are very, very much sort of minutiae of procedure and things like that. And to be honest, a development plan, a local plan, will go through a full-scale public inquiry. The Central Lincolnshire Local Plan inquiry sat in front of the planning inspector for about 3 months. I mean, as a neighbourhood, all you have to do really as a neighbourhood plan is get the district council to sign it off as compliant with the development plan. It's actually just gets sent off to some accredited person who literally signs it off. And I've seen quite a lot, just from a commercial perspective, I've seen a lot of disparity about, in terms of the quality and, what's been allowed to get through in some of these neighbourhood plans. So, quite often I'm personally, from a commercial perspective, I'm actually finding this quite, a little bit obstructive and scary. So it's certainly not doing what the government would. I mean, I'm sure there are neighbourhood plans out there that are, pragmatic you know, perhaps, you know, what Kate will talk about later is the approach that some neighbourhood plans, you know, could or ought to be taking. But just that last point, just be aware, this is all about delivery, delivery, delivery. Going back to that point I made earlier, people see planning as about sort of, you know, regulation and control. It shouldn't. It should be about facilitation, management and delivery. Controlling and managing development, I mean, this is the side that, you know, particularly as parish councils, this is the side that you'll probably have dealt with. You probably don't know the policy guys who are writing their development plan. The chap who is actually dealing with your planning application, or lady, will be much, you know, the development control or development management section. Again, just going back to that point again, decision making should be entirely, you know, should be in line with the local development plan unless material considerations dictate otherwise. County councils usually decide to transport, you know, major transport schemes and the minerals and waste application side, so things like sort of exploration, fracking, tipping, things like that are county matters, unless again as you're in a single tier like North Lincolnshire where it's everything. And then the districts are responsible for the, you know, for most of the sort of, you know, major to minor applications, everything from major housing sites down to, you know, satellite dishes and sheds. So, yeah, just again a bit of a system thing. All I'm saying there is that there is actually sort of audited targets on local authorities to make decisions, you know, speedily, as it were. So those are the targets for major and minor applications. This confuses people. What goes to planning committee is usually based on sort of local, you know, delegated schemes and standing orders. There is a lot of inconsistency about what one council will do, you know, would treat as a committee matter to what another one would. So, you know, I might find that the planning application I wanted to speak to committee, in actual fact I just get a sort of decision letter cold as opposed from the, you know, from the case officer. In other cases, a community might want to, you know, again speak and find out that it's already been decided by. I mean, just be aware, the difference between a delegation is the ability of a case officer, an actually employed officer of the council, to make a decision for a responsible person to sign that off. It's usually a sort of minor major distinction. Above a certain point or a certain level of objection or a ward member getting involved, those are the sort of triggers that would actually get something decided and voted on by planning committee. And of course, development control would also deal with enforcement issues as well. We won't talk about that so much, but in terms of, you know, people who've done naughty things like build without planning permission or breaches and things like that, they're also you know, they will have an enforcement function as well. Right. This is probably very much sparser and building on what I think Keith Vickers has probably already said. For local context, and again, sorry if you're from North Lincolnshire, if anybody wants to know what if anybody wants to know what the North East Lincolnshire development plan situation is, don't know, sorry, I can find out for you. North Lincolnshire I certainly know. The Central Lincolnshire plan has just been adopted. The ink is still wet on that. Yeah, I think it's April is the formal, so the decision has been issued on that. I've read in some detail what the inspector said on that. There is a lot of uncertainty about I mean, this is a case where an inspector, I think, has had to very much sort of, you know, go with what he's got. I sat through some of the sessions there. There's particularly a lot of controversy about the delivery of some of these bigger extensions on the Lincoln Fringe, like this Swampall site, which has been around forever and a day. Really, all the inspector's been able to say is, you know, council, you know, Central Lincolnshire Local Plan Joint Planning Body, whatever, keep an eye on this, and, you know, it goes into this 5-year supply. If your assumptions, you know, you persuaded me that it's safe to allocate these big urban extensions. Now you're saying that they will deliver. I've got nothing to really, you know, conclusively disprove that. So let's run with it, but you will monitor very closely, and if those sites are not delivering, you will make appropriate interventions. The figure they've actually come up with as a housing type is a middle of the road figure. I mean, some people argued a lower one, some people argued a higher one. He's gone for a middle of the road figure, but he's definitely said that's a minimum. So the council have got to deliver that. It's not a maximum. So the housing target this is just for monitoring purposes. So for 5-year supply, purposes. The figure that's built into that is for monitoring and review purposes, but it's not a ceiling, it's a minimum floor, not a ceiling. I'm reflecting what the National Planning Policy Framework says, and this is something that I think, you know, is very much the core of what we do here. Certainly in John Prescott's day, when the old planning policy statements ran the philosophy, very much sustainability was seen as urban first. It was urban concentration. But, you know, I mean, it was a view, most of the, you know, the sites like derelict land that we want delivering, you know, sort of we want delivering first are in urban areas. That's where all the existing sort of sort of community infrastructure, social infrastructure is based. Most, you know, just a broad assumption, you know, urban first, it's the most sustainable, and you've got to sort of justify otherwise. That approach has gone. It's far more horses for courses. You've got this issue of flexibility and local choice. The neighbourhood plan system we've already talked about, and also there's an exceptions approach in this, and this is very much the driver behind the schemes that we'll be talking about. If a local council hasn't got the resources or the will to actually come up with a neighbourhood plan, there's a policy in there now that says that schemes of any, notionally of any housing site and any remotement can actually come forward, provided the local community, as you know, signed off by parish council, supports it. So again, this sort of more than approach doesn't only have to be through a neighbourhood plan. There's policies in that central linkage to local plan that allow you to do, you know, any community backing to bring schemes like that forward. So really, new options are on the table from both the National Planning Framework and the central linkage to local plan. It is not urban first. Notionally, any settlement could expand as much as the community wants it. New settlements are not off the table anymore. Again, if the assumptions made about sort of growth in Lincoln prove to be over-optimistic and those housing, you know, the shortfall stacks up, not beyond the realms of possibilities, the new settlements in Lincolnshire, you know, wouldn't come on the table.
Surely, the urban first, what's being said, may not be now so prominent. Cost effectiveness says that if you want to build houses, don't go to open space because it's more to put the utility aspects in. So you look for existing communities who can cope with expansion, and the local community gets overruled by the district planning authority.
Can we park that only in the sense of, I think that's very much what we want to talk about in the workshops. If we run these workshops, I think, you know, that's where we want to tease out those sort of specific issues. Right. I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to hand over to Andrew. What Andrew's specifically going to look at is a lot of the, you know, I think some of the comments that came out earlier in terms of how, you know, specific schemes can be delivered to take on board some of these sort of these, you know, these sustainability themes, these sort of community themes. So I'll hand over to Andrew.
Okay, thank you.